Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Safe Spaces presented to you by InterSources Inc., where we're expanding security beyond the perimeter. I'm your host, Adon Neverett, and we've got a great discussion for you today around deepfake technology. I'm really excited about our guest for this quarter's webinar, and I'd like to provide a brief intro. Uh, we're joined today by Dr. Fred Kwong. He's been the information security and technology field for the past 20 plus years, working in education, financial, telecommunications, healthcare, and insurance sectors. He's an award-winning thought leader in security and currently works at DeVry University, my alma mater. So it's always great to revisit someone from DeVry University. He currently serves as the VP and Chief Informational Security Officer at DeVry. He's a member of several advisory boards and is a frequent speaker at national security forums on cybersecurity and informational technology, and is often asked to consult on matters of security and leadership. In addition to working at DeVry, Fred serves as a board member at DePage Habitat for Humanity and board member and director of communications at Chicago InfraGard. Received his bachelor's in psychology and professional communications and MBA in management information systems from Roosevelt University, and holds his doctorate in organization development at Benedictine University. Good morning, Fred. How are you?
I'm good, Adon. How are you doing today?
Excellent, excellent. Thanks for taking the time to visit with us this morning. I'm really excited about this conversation. You know, when you and I first met, um, we met at an InfraGard meeting, and this was actually the subject matter that you presented to everyone. And we had some really great conversation, and I thought our audience would benefit from today's subject and today's conversation. So, with that in mind, why don't we just kind of dive in? Deepfake technology has been something that's kind of been top of mind for a lot of us, and it's impacting a lot of us. Um, Maybe you can start just kind of sharing a little bit about, you know, uh, the impact deepfake technology is having, and we can kind of start from there and then take the conversation from that perspective.
Yeah, I think it probably starts with telling the audience a little bit about, I don't want to say the history of deepfake technology, but
Right.
the tremendous growth that's gone through in the past couple years. And so when I first started researching this topic a couple years back, I was doing a talk on it and getting a better understanding of, well, where is this technology? Where is it heading? And where is it at today? And it's changed dramatically in the last 2 years. So when I first started having this conversation, the technology was not, it was good, but the really good technology, the ones where it was difficult to understand if this was real or fake, um, was complex. It took a lot of time to create. It was difficult to do the voice manipulation and the video at the same time. And then the live content was very, very difficult, right? Or very, very expensive. And so people were getting interested in technology just because, oh, it's a bit of a novelty. And today, because of the acceleration of AI, it is a real live threat to organizations. Um, and the latest technology um, has exasperated itself so much in the sense that now you don't even have to wear um, things to make you look like a certain person, like a wig or makeup or anything like that. It can just change someone like yourself, Adon, into me directly, right? Without any um, items or clothing items that you need, right? We can be completely two different people, and the technology is good enough to match those things together and make it look like we've just swapped, right? So it's kind of scary how well the technology has gotten. And so I think most organizations haven't really followed the trends around deepfakes. They kind of hear the headlines. They know that some of it's been used from time to time, but um, here at the university, we are seeing a lot of impersonation being used, and deepfakes is just going to be a growing movement in terms of that impersonation fraud.
Mm. So do you feel like most organizations are underestimating deepfake technology?
Yeah, I don't know if underestimating is the right word. I would say it's haven't taken the time to really understand where that technology can be used and how it can be
Yeah.
used against these organizations, right?
Right.
So most of the time, uh, as security leaders, we focus more on internal defenses, right? And this is something external to the organization, and
Hmm.
that's what makes it somewhat unique in that sense, right? It is a attack vector that we now have to then utilize or validate and try to understand how we're going to detect this being used against our organization.
Mm.
And the proliferation of AI, those types of attacks are increasing. So yeah, I would say most organizations aren't spending probably as much time as they need to thinking about this attack type and how they're
Mm.
going to counter it.
Mm. And as you are probably very well aware, we're seeing kind of a massive growth in the space of AI driven. Fraud is up 1,300%, and deep take tools are becoming more accessible. What do you think is driving this acceleration?
Well, the first one is the easy one, right? We've already kind of talked about the technology increasing, which basically means it's more affordable, more available to threat actors trying to use the technology. Um, so it's better, cheaper, faster, right?
Mm.
All the things that you would want to hear about when you're buying something net new, right? It's also faster. The time it takes to create the deep fakes is much quicker than it used to be as well. So you can create more deep fakes and kind of spam them out and look for an effective hit much easier from that perspective. And then there's the availability of data. So when you kind of break down the different attack patterns in deep fakes, there's voice that can be used, there's video, there's the combination of those both. There's the live attacks. And so there's a lot more information out there on social media sites, on LinkedIn, where people are posting video, they're posting voice. And you can see this and use it to create those deepfake models, right? That would then be used
Mhm.
against an organization. When you think about something like deep faking a CEO, for example, right? A lot of CEOs are out there giving talks or talking to the press. So their
Mhm.
voice and video and their mannerisms are already out there on the internet. It doesn't take a lot of time and effort then to take uh, those pre-recorded real sessions of the individual that you're trying to deepfake and then turn that around and to create the deepfake of that person.
Mm. And you see that that's interesting. I don't think I've ever come across anything quite like that before. But is that on the rise too?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so we've already seen different patterns or uses on to kind of affect um, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, kind of the voice of the people, right? And you see it used in smear campaigns. Um,
Mm.
Celebrities get a lot of deep fakes for that particular reason. I would argue that Elon Musk is probably one of the top individuals that get deepfaked the most, right? Because he
Mm.
has a very well-known presence. He's uh, has a very specific speaking pattern, and so it's easy to kind of deepfake him because he's so well known on the internet. His voice and video have been out there, and you see a lot of different deepfakes of like a Elon Musk saying, "Hey, I'm going to invest in this next cryptocurrency," right? And it's a
Right.
fake advertisement to get people to buy a certain cryptocurrency.
No, now that you kind of shared that example, you're right. Now I can see I can yeah that I've definitely have seen that on the rise for sure. Um, with the increase in deepfake tools on the dark web, I think it's gone up 220 some percent. Um, how does the accessibility change the threat landscape for organizations?
It's this ability to give people that may not be fluent in these technologies capabilities that they can now utilize, right? And so it's now no longer like a commodity, or it makes it more of a commodity, no longer like a boutique threat, right?
Hmm.
So if you think about something as simple as password spraying type of attacks, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't take someone with a lot of skill to do those things. And that's the same thing with like deepfake technology now. It used to be like, oh, I have to know, um, I have to have the right GPU, I have to have the right processing and RAM power, I have to have the right technologies and tools to make it realistic. And now you can pay a couple credits to different AI companies and then create these deep fakes very easily. So it, it makes it so that attackers can then experiment and optimize those deep fakes as well, looking at different voice and language until something works appropriately for them. And it's we see it in a lot of alarming type of attacks, right? And when I say alarming, what I'm talking about is you see deepfakes being used to target parents or grandparents. So one of the
Hmm.
threats that's often used today is someone pretending to be a grandchild or a child and saying, "Hey, I got a flat on the road. I can't move forward until I pay this towing company, and they're willing to just leave me here by the side of the road. Can you help me? Can you get me? Can you send me $50 or $100 so I can pay this guy?" Right.
Mm.
So they're putting urgency to it. It's in the child's voice, and as a concerned parent, you're like, all right, well, 50, $100, whatever, right?
Right.
Send the money. And you're probably not even going to go through the steps to verify because you're in that sense of urgency or panic mode, right? I need to
Sure.
get my child out of danger. And so these threat actors know that, and they take advantage of those types of scenarios to put them in front of parents so that they react quickly, right? And that's how even the best of us can fall victim to deep fakes.
And they start off with a nominal amount of money, and then once they get access, it's all wiped out.
Yeah.
Um,
And so to your point, though, like these attacks, they're like you have the ones that are targeting businesses and organizations, right?
right.
You hear about CEOs deep faking to the CFO to send millions of dollars, but then you also have these small attacks, right? Going after small amounts of money. And you see both of these. And the reason why you see both now is because of that commercialization of the deepfake technology.
Hmm.
Someone that's not very skilled a threat actor, $100 is like, great. That's 100 more than I had before, and it cost me, pennies to the dollar to make a deep fake, right?
Right. Right. And so, where do you see organizations? Where are they most vulnerable?
I think right now it's that service desk level, right, or the help desk
Yeah.
level. If you think about that operational component, so the service desk is primarily made up of either hourly employees, outsourced contractors, or potentially folks that are paid to drive call resolution and paid to be helpful, right? Those are the two things that are um, going against them, right? When against Or going against us when it comes to deepfake attacks. So I'm
Mhm.
calling in to support that. I'm saying, hey, I'm Professor so and so. I need to get into my class right away. Class is starting in 10 minutes and I need access again. I'm locked out. Help me out, right? So sense of urgency, um, telling someone that's like, hey, their job is to help people as much as possible, right? And so let's get them reset. Let's get them working again, right?
Mm,
And so you can see that attack pattern happen very quickly in that sense. They're going to go and say, hey, I know that these folks are trained to help and support people. That is their job. I'm going to add a better sense of urgency to it. And then I'm going to find a way to either, if that doesn't work right away, I will then move to a more threatening tone. And it's almost like a SOP that these folks um, share with one another to say, this is how you can compromise a individual. Because it's
mm,
not really they're compromising the system, they're compromising the individual to pull on emotions, pull on heartstrings, and use that as a way to then gain access to an identity.
mm. And are you seeing that at that level of are you seeing that increasing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of identity fraud happening at the university level, and then when I talk to my peers,
Mm,
they're seeing the same thing occurring as well.
mm,
So these and they're for all different reasons, right? Whether it's
mm,
getting access to identity, ultimately, what they're trying to do is either get more compromised credentials, so they'll access or get access to one identity and use that to send out phishing emails or phishing campaigns. Or the flip side is they get access to the one identity and they'll go after, at the university level, they'll go after things like um, financial aid and trying to get dollars, right? Or they'll go after, if they're a paid employee, they'll go after a way to change the ACH routing numbers, right? So
mm,
then paychecks get routed somewhere else.
mhm,
And if you think about those types of attacks, the victim may not even know that it's happening until
mm.
it's too late, right? Until all of a sudden, hey, where's my paycheck? Or I was supposed to receive funds for um, this semester. Where's my funds? And then you
Right.
ask about it, and then it's all retrospect, right? At that point.
And you kind of touched on this already, Fred, but specific, especially the education. But when you look at other industries that where trust is so critical, like government or telecom or pharma, um, when this occurs, when an incident like this occurs, um, what other um, kind of damage are these attacks actually causing to organizations like that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, when they're trying to get access to bigger organizations, right?
Right.
Um, what they're really trying to do is a couple different things. It's either disruption of a service, or they're trying to get their way into data theft or data exfiltration, or potentially set up a ransomware scenario. Right. That's what at least I've been seeing kind of in the field and what I've been
Mhm.
reading about when it comes to security and talking with my peers. Those
Right.
are kind of the three things that they're really kind of going after, right? So,
Mhm.
from a service disruption perspective, if they can shut down services, maybe they can affect stock pricing, right? Um, or 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 maybe they're just trying to do it because um, they're not happy with the way that that company is doing a certain thing. Um, and so it's more geopolitical in nature, right? Um, and then from a data exfiltration perspective, uh, that's being used right now, as you can imagine, to either sell back that data, exploit the organization in one way, shape, or form. And of course, ransomware is just an extension of that.
Right. And so there was a stat out there that, in 2026, 30% of enterprises won't be able to rely on the standalone identity verification. Um, so, what's breaking in our current approach? What's not working in your estimation?
I think in most organizations, the validation of the identity is kind of the linchpin that most organizations have. And so if I'm on the phone, especially now with a lot of folks having remote or hybrid workforce, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
calling someone on the other side, how does that person validate that I am the correct individual? And a lot of times that will be, okay, I'm going to ask for an employee ID or maybe a date of birth, um, you know, last four digits of a social, something to
Mm-hmm.
that extent. But
Mm-hmm.
what we do know is that with there being so many breaches, a lot of that data is now public and available.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes it harder for organizations to just use those um, facts alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens is, well, hey, let me validate them by having them come on a video and showcase who they are, who they say they are, right? I can see them as a in person, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where deepfakes kind of come in. Right? If I can then impersonate that person and look like the person, then it makes it harder for them to then validate those components. And so then a third option that organizations have is, well, I'm going to have you then show yourself in person. I can hear you, I can see you, but I'm actually going to have you also show a form of government ID. So
Mm-hmm.
now the expectation is, okay, so you have a outsourced support desk or you have hourly workers and you're going to trust them to validate that that government ID is real compared
Mm-hmm.
to a a fake driver's license or whatever the case may be. And the reality is these folks aren't trained to do that, right?
Right.
Um, I mean, even myself, it's a proclaimed person that's been in the security field for 20 years. I'm not going to know the difference between a real Hawaii ID or Idaho ID, right? Because it's not the exposures that I have. Um, and even so, you look through this lens through a webcam, pictures are blurry and they don't, um, even if it looks somewhat realistic, they're probably going to check off on it, right? And so this becomes an issue for these organizations that are relying on those different ways to validate because they don't have technologies in place to validate the identity instead, right?
Right. Well, one of our audience members just made a comment. You only need to fool one person, right? You don't need to fool an entire organization. You just need one person to make a mistake, and then you're at risk. Um, so, if you look at the traditional identity signals like voice or video, and they can no longer be trusted. What should organizations be relying on instead?
So I think you kind of have to, at this point, use AI to fight AI, right? And so there are technology companies out there that will do identity validation. And they use a couple different methods to do that, right? So one is they'll look at facial recognition, understanding, hey, is this Fred real? When I look at my face going left and right, and they will validate this seems to
Hmm.
be a real person versus a deep fake. And then the
Hmm.
second piece is they'll look at identity validation in terms of the credential. So taking a picture of that driver's license and validating it appropriately, uh, using that against the database to say, to what percent am I going to say this looks factual or this looks real?
Hmm.
And using those technologies together to say, hey, we are at 95% confidence that this person is who they say they are, and relying on those types of technologies to help with things like password resets or MFA resets, I think is something that a lot of organizations are going to start needing to move to if they haven't already.
What are your thoughts around machine to machine authentication? Is
I,
that
it's So we're seeing a lot of that happening now, especially in the AI world, right? So,
Mhm,
um, you hear about things like non-human identities,
mhm,
and the need to validate and govern those identities appropriately because one, they have a lot of access, and
mhm,
so how do we validate that those folks, those identities are being used in a way that uh, they were meant to be used for, right? And
mhm,
so that's where this concept of a machine validating machine starts to occur,
mhm,
whether that's uh, in addition with use of certificates, um, or you have someone kind of monitoring these uh, accounts or these
mhm,
non-human identities in ways that we can flag to make sure that, hey, it looks like it's doing something it shouldn't be, for example. um, and this area is still very new because you have agents now that are doing things on behalf of a uh, subjugated task or a prompt that it's given, and it can go a little bit off the wall, right? What we're seeing, there was a article that talked about a AI agent, um, essentially siphoning off or using more uh, video generation capacity because it knows that it can do more if it has more processing power, right? So it's thinking for itself and saying, hey, I'm going to go siphon this off, even though I wasn't told to, because I know I can then process faster. And so being able to track those identities and the use of those, what their patterns should be, becomes really important, right? When you think about that, um, call it agents looking after agents.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So when you look at existing security frameworks, um, why do you think, in your opinion, why do you think they're struggling to keep up with AI-driven threats like deepfakes? And where are our biggest blind spots, in your opinion?
um, I don't know if well, let me answer this in a couple different ways.
Mhm,
There is a lack of dedication of resources um, to some of these frameworks, for example, right? Um, NIST has some great frameworks out there, and they're putting out a lot of great content around AI and how to address it in organizations. Um, I think deepfake patterns is just kind of one one of many components when it comes to AI and AI governance that has to occur. Um, but I think part of the reason why this is a bit of a gap or a blind spot is um, it is one of many attack vectors that can be used against an organization. And so, how do you quantify that risk level to then say, hey, we need additional controls in this specific attack pattern um, because our organization is at risk? And how then do you balance that against other attack patterns that are being used that you also need additional controls and governance for, right?
mhm,
And so I think it gets kind of kicked a little bit to the curb
mhm,
to some extent because some of the um, workflows have been working traditionally fairly well. And so the risk doesn't bubble itself up until it's almost too late, right? And
mhm,
until it gets to a level where you see X percentage of these attacks working and being successful, then all of a sudden it becomes an issue, right? And the goal is to try to get on in front of these things before it becomes an issue. But that's a hard conversation to have when you have resource constraints, budget constraints, and other things kind of going on.
Right. Um, you made a great, at the end of your comment, the idea of all of that, but then you're dealing with so many of our leaders in this industry, CISOs, CTOs, CIOs, dealing with budgetary constraints, all these constraints, but yet they're feeling this pressure of keeping the environment secure, keeping the organization protected from these hackers. And it just makes it a very challenging balance when you have these constraints, but yet you can't necessarily afford to go out and obtain the necessary tools to do what's necessary to protect the organization. So it's a very challenging position to be in when you're in that role.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, Adon, that's where we can be selective, right?
Mhm.
When it comes to some of the technologies, because a lot of them are based off of use, right? Hey,
Right,
I check one identity, it costs me X amount of dollars, right? And
right.
so then maybe we start with our more privileged accounts and say, hey, for any resets where I think it's a privileged individual, or
Mhm.
we say, hey, anyone that's a director level and above, we are going to set, an additional layer of validation, right?
Right.
Because to your point, it's deepfakes. They target human decision layers, right? And those are a
Mhm.
little bit harder to quantify
Mhm.
and automate.
Mhm.
These technologies, they're definitely helping with that, and it can be faster. So, looking at the cost benefit analysis, looking at, hey, what does it cost an organization to do a reset today versus automating that, that can help, uh, build your use case, especially if you have like a in-source support desk, right?
Mhm.
And you think about kind of your cost um, per cost per call, then you can say, well, hey, if I can remove 30% of my calls and automate them because I'm using advanced identity validation technologies, and then allowing for self-service, maybe that will help improve your number one call metrics, but then number two, you can either potentially have a even ROI or a minimal increase in costs, to then help deflect the use of some of these newer technologies.
Yeah. And so for those organizations that perhaps are listening that are out there that feel unprepared, um, what are your kind of first practical steps that you could suggest they should take to start mitigating this risk?
Uh, so the first thing I would do is kind of look at those high impact workflows, right?
Okay.
Do you have wire transfers, payroll changes,
Mhm.
onboarding or hiring, right? And again, kind of password resets, anything that's executive based, right?
Mhm.
Having some of those, looking at those workflows and seeing where we can inject some of these new technologies that can not only help to detect deepfake use or identity fraud use, but then can also enhance those workflows with technologies.
Mhm.
And then, I mentioned this in my InfraGard talk as well, but
Mhm.
I use a sort of out of band verification, right? So the
Mhm.
concept of having a secret word that's shared amongst individuals that nobody else would know,
Mhm.
is important, right? A safe word, if you want to call it
Mhm.
that.
Right.
And then, there's things that you can also do and work with your banks on, right? So, hey, we're gonna have callback verifications, and that's a non-negotiable. Or hey, we're going to allow changes, but delay it within 48 hours, right? Before that change can be made so it can be validated or vetted appropriately. So putting in some process there uh, helps to lower the risk for those or the impact to those organizations as well.
Amazing. Okay. Great suggestions. When you look ahead 2 to 3 years from now, how do you see deepfakes evolving? And what should leaders be doing now to stay ahead of what's coming?
I think it's a couple of things. One is we're going to see again the increasing evolution of the deepfake technology, that more real-time manipulation in both live voice and video, even multilingual could
Mm,
occur. Um, so higher quality, lower effort, right?
mhm,
Um, we're going to see deepfakes being used to get past that kind of first layer of defense, and then from there they may use other AI technologies to then move east west or laterally, right, in an organization. Um, and so to combat all these things, I think there's things that organizations need to be able to do. One, they need to be able to quickly identify um, and have statements ready for deepfakes, and even technologies that can help interpret if something is a deepfake. So, for example, if there is now a new CEO video that is out there making the rounds and it's a deepfake, well, you have to have a holding statement ready to say, hey, this is organization, Acme, and we've done analysis.
mhm,
This is a deep fake. Our CEO has not said these things, and this is, potentially this is how we prove that that is the case, right? So
mhm,
getting in front of that 24-hour news cycle before these things hit, or when they hit, I should say. And then internally, it's building strong, resilient identity validations, right?
mhm,
Stronger MFA, um, device trust, maybe even just in time uh, validation or just in time access as well, along with other kind of risk based controls.
mhm,
Um, and then I think the other thing is to make sure that you're training and making sure that your employees and colleagues are aware of this type of attack so that
mhm,
they can ask the questions. Hey, is this something a Don would normally ask me for? Do I have a
mhm,
way to validate it outside of what I just heard to make sure that it is real, it is him, and make that kind of part of the routine, right? Um, like I mentioned, things like code words or having a different way to access that individual to ensure they are who they say they are.
and those are all great suggestions, Fred. And I think one of the challenges too for so many, especially large enterprise organizations, where there's layer after layer after layer of departments and stakeholders and individuals, and is that the lack of uh, communicate, or not the lack necessarily, but it can be so challenging to have an effective communication, because oftentimes they may operate in silos, these departments, depending on the size of the organization. I would think a critical part of defending against this type of threat is having a really good communication plan in real time, where you can communicate with other departments and other stakeholders to make them aware, informed. Um, all of that I think plays a role. I don't know if you agree with that, or want to add to that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all part of good crisis management, right? To your
Right,
point,
right.
um, whether that crisis is, fake news that's occurring that it's
Hmm.
affecting the organization, or it's a real threat that's occurring, whether it be a fire or a hurricane or whatever the case would be. How do you communicate effectively to your employees in mass, right?
Right.
And again, having those holding statements available, having the ability to execute and deliver messages across multiple people very quickly. It's that dissemination of information that they can know and trust, and that helps to tamper down speculation very quickly as well. So it's really important to make sure that as a security professional, you're partnering with your communications department, you're partnering with your legal department um, when addressing these types of threats, because there's multiple ways that need to be used to address these threats. The security technology is just one of them, right? But process and communication are equally as important.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, this has all been really great insight, Fred. Thank you again for taking the time to visit with us on this very important subject. And what I'd like to do is transition now and open it up to some Q&A for our audience. And as we've been during this conversation, Fred, I've been kind of monitoring the chat, and one of our guests has a question from Mark Preeb. What concerns does your organization have with the use of biometrics to secure your critical business operations with some of the technology you referred to?
I think if you're using the technology the way that it's intended to be used, I don't think there's a lot of concerns I have around biometrics. Um, Most of the concern around biometrics that you hear is around storing biometric data. But
Mm,
I think a lot of the good technologies don't actually store biometric data, right? So it's about doing your homework. Yes, you're using Face ID or whatever the case may be to initiate the use of that as a identity validation, but that data isn't stored. You're not storing like the facial imprints of that person, right? And I think that's really important to when you're vetting the technologies that you're using around biometrics,
mhm,
that you're finding technology and firms that aren't storing that data. And I think where this really kind of came about is um, back in the 2000s. I want to say, is it 2000? Maybe I don't. Maybe it's 2010ish. Um, a lot of biometric was around capturing fingerprints and handprints, right? And you
mhm.
would put your hand into some device, and it would then validate who you are, right?
Right,
And those
right.
devices did capture that biometric data, and they and I think, yeah, don't use that stuff anymore. The technology's evolved to the point where you no longer have to do that, right? You no longer have to store that biometric data. You can be stored in um, a different manner to validate who you are.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Got another question from the audience. How can smaller teams or organizations with limited budgets realistically defend against this kind of threat?
Yeah, I mean, my team's not huge, right? So this is near and dear to me as well. And
Right.
I think again, it's weighing the risks that you have as an organization to see where this one kind of bubbles up. And I
Mhm,
mentioned some of those components, right, that you can do to try to mitigate against this threat. But ultimately, I think those are all stopgaps, right?
mhm,
And you know, doing the video calls, showing ID. I mean, those things will definitely help. But as this technology gets better and it
mhm,
becomes easier for someone else to use, especially the ones that can also change the voice, right?
mhm, mhm,
Because I think a lot of the threat actors right now are coming from overseas. And so
mhm,
that even if they can change the video, if you notice, uh, and this may sound kind of biased, but if you notice certain accents that don't jive with the way someone looks, it kind of automatically flags you in a different way.
mhm,
But
mhm,
when you have these fake technologies that can translate language and can make someone sound more American and look more American, right?
mhm.
Uh, the chances are that they'll be able to fake that identity of that American much easier, and we will have to invest. And this is a conversation that you're going to have with your leadership to say, hey, this threat is real. We are seeing it out in the wild. We are seeing it being used against us, and we're going to need to put some resources towards this type of threat if we care about it. And again, you can kind of start small too. Start with your critical workflows, start
Mm-hmm.
with your critical individuals, and uh, do it by the level of risk, right? Someone that is, a janitor in your organization, they may have a login, but if they don't have access to a lot of uh, sensitive data, then maybe that risk is acceptable, and we're going to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to identity validate that person because we need to save some dollars here, right? So
Right.
making those kind of tough choices, unfortunately, if your budgets are that tight, I think those are conversations that you need to have as well, right?
Yeah.
But don't have
Tough,
them in a
but
vacuum, right? Don't make that decision on your own. Have it as
sure.
a committee, have it with the executive leadership.
Right. And it goes back to our comments around communication, right? Have a great internal communication with all the stakeholders within the organizations to make those decisions. Um, Great questions from the audience. We've got another one. Um, how are multi-factor authentication and zero trust enough, or do we need to rethink identity entirely?
I, I, I would say I don't know if it's enough, right?
Right.
For one thing, you have MFA fatigue that occurs, right? So you want to migrate to fish resistant MFA if nothing else, and
Mhm.
so and then with zero trust, it also kind of depends on what other factors your organization allows. So it's hard to say, if you are locked down, hey, nothing enters or moves into my organization other than these authenticated devices that we're going to say have certificates tied to them, and we're looking at risk-based control, so we understand geolocation and can kind of combine all these things
Mhm.
potentially. But if your organization also allows for, hey, I'm going to allow things like um, O365 to be accessed outside of corporate devices, then maybe not, right? And so it
Right.
kind of depends. I hate to give the it depends answer,
Yeah.
but there is a little bit of that. I think you just need to factor in this risk concern into your program to say, do I think MFA and zero trust is enough based off of the way that we have implemented in our organization, or do we need an additional level of validation when it
Hmm.
comes to things like MFA reset?
Hmm. Okay. Another question from the audience. For organizations that are in highly regulated industries, how are compliance and governance evolving to address deepfake issues? Deepfake risk.
So I think we all know that um, policy is slow to change, especially here in the States.
Hmm.
If you're talking about either state or
Right.
federal regulation. And so I would argue that it is not keeping up with where the threat levels are at. And this
Hmm.
is where you have to build your own policies internally to the organization or standards to say what is acceptable or what is not. If you're waiting for those regulations to bring down the hammer and help you, I think it's a little bit harder.
Hmm.
Now, we do have new regulations, at least at the education side, that is saying, hey, we need a certain level of validation, AOLs, to validation for um, when you do financial aid. And
Hmm.
we are starting to see that change. But the downside to that, especially if you think about other industries, is um, you can be turning away potential clients, right? And so there is always that rub that happens for organizations, and they may lobby against that and say, "Hey, let us decide this on our own. We don't need you to, build more uh, regulation into the industry, right?"
Right.
So a little bit of that could be happening as well. Um, I would say again, having those conversations internally, having that conversation about that risk, and saying what makes sense for your organization. One of the things so I've worked in education, I've worked in healthcare, right? And they're two of the
Mm-hmm.
most targeted um, sectors, right, by threat actors today.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these organizations, what happens is they're like, well, how do we look compared to our peers? And my answer to that is always, well, why would you want to compare yourself to kind of the worst of the worst, right? In the sense of where we're at today. Don't we want to compare ourselves to hold ourselves to a higher standard? And so follow the banking, follow the financials. And if you see changes there, you'll probably notice that it'll start trickling down elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that comment. We got time for a couple more questions for Fred. Um, Another question from the audience: if voice and video are no longer reliable signals, what becomes the new standard of trust inside an organization, and how do you operationalize that without slowing everything down?
I mean, so an easy way is passphrases, right? And I don't mean passphrase like the password passphrases, but I
Hmm.
mean, you know, uh, you used to see it in movies all the time, right? Spy movies, right? I
Yeah,
knock on a door, and it's the riddle little red fox jumps through the hole, and then you answer with something else, right? And say,
sure.
I don't know, black shoes are great,
Right,
and it might be something as simple as that, right? Something that AI cannot learn very easily. And it's something that's not written down anywhere. It's something that is shared and known amongst those two people that are communicating. And that's maybe that level of trust that's needed. Or you have trusted areas where signal communication can occur.
hmm.
And you move to trusted lines, right? That type of thing. But again, those things are expensive. They could potentially be expensive. So you have to weigh the risks, right? And say what makes sense. And then you do look at things like, um, you know, a validating that a device is what they say it is, how they say, it is a device that is owned by your organization, and we know because of X, Y, Z. And for an individual, hey, we know it's this individual because they're located in this area. Their webcam is one that is hits these specific metrics with us. Um, or device types with us, and there's other things that you can start looking at in terms of metadata, right?
Hmm.
And then we may move to the kind of the phone-based validation world too, right, where you have to have some sort of physical device
Hmm.
or a token, whether that be a YubiKey or something like that. So there's different ways to validate signals that can be used today. You just kind of have to weigh out what makes sense again for your organization.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question. What are some communication tools for real-time stakeholder communication other than cell phone?
So I'll generalize here. I don't want to call out any specific vendors, but there are technologies that can run ticker tapes across desktops, right?
Hmm.
That you can blast out messages. Um, I don't know. I liken it to the old days of you used to be through Microsoft be able to do net sends, right? And
Sure.
you can do a net send and blast across everybody's desktop, and they have to kind of click OK to make it go away, right? So that it was seen to some extent.
Hmm.
Other communication forms, um, other than cell, obviously email blast. If you have some sort of Teams channel, you can use, or a Slack channel that's for the entire organization, whatever makes sense. Those things can occur there. Um, what I like to do for critical communication, though, is don't rely on any one single type of communication platform, right? Blast it out in as many ways as you can in order to ensure that you're reaching the wider audience as a whole. And make sure that in those channels and in those discussions, you test to validate that those communication channels are working appropriately, and do that on a yearly basis at a minimum.
Yeah. Great thoughts there. We're going to take one more. Where do you see cryptographic identity, like signed media or watermarking, realistically fitting, and what's the future mode when attackers control both content and distribution?
It's a great question. I would say I don't have a crystal ball on this one. The problem with, in my opinion, cryptographic identity is what is the source of truth associated with that identity validation, right? Because it's almost like I liken it to um, third party validation, right? When we do vendor metrics or when we do vendor management. Um, and we don't ever have a single source of truth in that because there's dollars behind every type of way to do that vendor validation, right? Everybody wants a bit of a slice of that pie. So, do you accept identity, signed identities from these sources, and these are considered sources of truth, um, or not, right?
Hmm.
And it's how do you get that message across? Say, hey, InterSources is going to watermark all our videos in this way,
Hmm.
and this is how you validate to make sure that this is a real video of Adon and Fred speaking.
Hmm.
Well, one, take the time to do that. Two, um, then what if that changes, right? What if you change vendors? What does that look like, right? You deal with those pain points, and maybe it does become, hey, we're going to allow these different ways to watermark or cryptographically identify, and these are our de facto standards. Or I don't think you're going to see big movements here until uh, you see a standard take one up and say these are the appropriate ways to do that, and these
Hmm.
are the appropriate ways to validate. But
Hmm.
then even then, when you think about public, um, how much of the public is going to take the time to actually scrutinize and validate those things,
Sure.
because of this whole 24-hour news cycle, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
depending on your use case, may be effective, but hard to say, right? And that's why my crystal ball is still a little muggy here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's definitely it makes you think and keep keep you on your toes for sure when it comes to um, what's happening, what the future looks like, and what are the tools that you have access to that seems to be evolving as well to combat this threat. Um, this webinar has been absolutely fantastic, Fred. Thank you for sharing your insights, for all the great work you're doing at DeVry and the different organizations you represent. I know, one thing is clear. The way we've traditionally defined identity and trust is being challenged in real time. And these technologies continue to evolve. The gap, at least for now, seems to look real. Well, what looks real and what is real will only get smaller. That gap will only get smaller. Um, Fred, thank you for sharing your insights and helping us navigate such a critical and complex topic. Couldn't think of anyone better to speak on this topic than you, my friend. And to everyone joining us in the audience, thanks for your questions. Thanks for your participation and for your attendance. Um, the session will be spark new questions and ideas. That's exactly kind of the purpose of Safe Spaces. We'll be sharing this recording on LinkedIn so you can access it and share it with your network in the future. Thanks again, and keep your eyes and ears open for our next upcoming webinar next quarter. Thanks again, and have a great Tuesday. Bye for now.
Yeah. Thanks, Adon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Fred.